Díobh Gach Lá is Misha Ashling of Bitesize Irish. Hi everyone, my name is Ashling from Bitesize Irish, and in this month's member interview I chatted to the lovely Melinda. She is a Grow member and a very active member on Pobal as well, and she was introduced to the Irish language through music and spirituality. So her story is very, very interesting, and I'm so grateful to her for sharing her time with me, and I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I enjoyed chatting to her. Slán go fóill.
Díobh Gach Lá. So you're very welcome to today's Agallamh Baill. I have the lovely Melinda online with me. So thank you so much, Melinda, for agreeing to do this. I'm really excited to chat to you and hear your story more in detail. So first of all, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit to us as Gaeilge?
Okay, falter out. It's Misha Melinda, gardener. I'm Rugame in Brooklyn, New York, New Erach. Tommy Imahony in Hillsdale, New Erach, Fuitua. Time Posta, Agus ta Kethrar Poshti Aguin, Agus Nianor Garpashti.
Oh, Annie, yes. So you've a big family. Annie, yes. Great. So thank you very much. So Melinda is one of our Grow members, and she's very active on Pobal, and is always sharing really beautiful links to cultural things and literature and music. And I'm only with Bitesize about 2 months now, and when I read Melinda's bio and her background and everything, I thought it was so fascinating. So you've shared your story a bit with us already on Pobal about your musical therapy background and how you became to kind of understand your own Irish heritage and what that meant to you. So would you mind just kind of giving us a little brief background on how you got to where you are now with the Irish language, how it all started?
Well, it's like many things with me. It kind of comes, little bits come over the years, and then suddenly something catalyzes it. So, I think my first exposure to Gaelic was actually, we were living in Nova Scotia for a summer, and all the street signs were in Scots Gaelic. And then in the 80s, 1980s, I was an apprentice of a Native American elder. And I started, I'm not a Native American, I'm not an Indigenous American. And I started searching for similar traditions in the West. So that would be more harmonious with me as an Irish Italian American. And I ended up I started corresponding with this very eccentric Canadian man who called himself a Druid, and he was an expert in Old Irish, and he had this little journal that was half in English and half in Irish. That was kind of, so these are little bits and pieces, and then I had started studying just on my own, like hunting down the stories and the myths, and which was very hard back then because there was no internet and you had to go to these like used bookstores to find things. And then I started, so I was really getting immersed in things Irish and Scottish, and the language was there, but I couldn't make, heads or tails of it. Though this man, Sean, was he would say that you couldn't understand the culture and the spirituality unless you learned the language. That's what he would say. And then at the end of the 1980s, my oldest son, his class, my children went to Waldorf schools, decided to make instruments as their senior project. And I found this plan for the Trinity College harp, actually. And David made me my first harp, my son David. That's how I started playing. And because it was a wire-strung harp, my teacher, Ann Heyman, we were working with really old techniques and the Bunting collection. So there that was. If people know what that is, it was the collection of tunes from the 1792 Harp Festival. And there was the language again in the old script, So, but I guess I could say what really got me wanting to learn the language first was in 2006. I met a Scottish woman who introduced me to this very old contemplative spiritual path that was grounded in Gaelic traditions of Scotland and Ireland, and within it were all these amazing chants that some are in Old Irish, some are in Modern Irish, some are in Scots Gaelic. So I realized if I was going to sing them, I needed to study the language a little. And then kind of the catalyst was hearing Irlo Leonard singing. A friend of mine, well, a sort of a mentor of mine in therapeutic music, her mother was born in Ballyvorney. And she called me up one day and she said, you have to listen to this singer, and especially see if you can get his recording of Aisling Gal when he was 14. You have to listen to this.
Oh, wow.
So that was it. Actually, I became kind of obsessed with listening to his music, his singing, because there's something that he does that just grabbed me. There's something about the feeling in the way he sings. And then so I decided to learn Munster Irish. So I got,
Brilliant.
so and that was it. And then, and then I started researching my ancestry a little more, and it all fit together.
Yeah.
So that was it. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I think it's really interesting that you kind of came through a different path to a lot of people. A lot of people start with their ancestry and then might lead to the language that way, but you kind of went through the more spiritual and musical path. And are your ancestry from the Munster region, or were they from somewhere else?
Well, they are what I found, and it was funny because I don't think I knew any of it until maybe 5 years ago. And when I started studying the language, or when I started thinking about studying it, and I found out that my mother's father, Eddie Powers, his parents were from Waterford, like right on the border, Carrick and Soar. So they were from there.
Okay.
And yeah.
Very nice. And you learned the harp through the oral tradition. So it was, the kind of old way. Was that something you decided to do, or was that something your teacher kind of insisted you do?
Well, back then, which was in the late 80s, there were only a few players of the wire-strung harp in America, and probably even in Ireland back then. And that's how they did it. The teacher, there were only two people that I knew that played wire. Well, there was Alan Stivell, so he was from Brittany. He wasn't my teacher, but his music inspired a lot of us. And the two people that I could possibly study from were researching all the old fingernail techniques. So that was the only way you could play that harp, really. It doesn't sound good if you play it in the normal way. You have to play it with your fingernails.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so interesting because to learn music that way, the oral tradition, which for those of you who don't know was kind of the way music was taught for generations, and the way stories in the Irish language was kind of passed down as well, because people couldn't read or write. It's kind of quite beautiful to be introduced to the music that way as well as the language. And I've never actually heard of people learning that way, especially outside of Ireland. So I think it's fantastic. And if it wasn't for your son, do you think you would have learned a different traditional instrument, or was it because he made the instrument that you felt the need to kind of start with that instrument?
Well, no, I think I would have pursued the harp because a friend of mine had gotten a harp, and the harp, it's symbology, and it's just like essential to Irish music. It's like an archetype, actually. And when you look at a harp, certain thoughts come up in your mind. There might be angels, but it's a powerful thing. So I think I would have taken up the harp. Yeah.
Yeah, and its evolution as well has kind of been in line with the language too. It started as something very noble and very prestigious, and then kind of, died out of the tradition a little bit and is coming back again. So that's really, really lovely. And you kind of mentioned that someone told you that the kind of cultural aspect of the language is integral to learning. And would you agree with that to a certain extent? Do you think that having that understanding of the culture aids your language learning as well?
I think so, and I think a language helps create a culture. So it's like a two-way street, I think. They're connected completely because the way you think, the language forms the whole way of thinking in a way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's kind of always the backdrop to the language. Yeah, especially I think for quite an old language, like Irish, it's important to understand why there's kind of that religious undertone to a lot of greetings and things. So yeah, that's very, very interesting. And you also worked for a long time in your life as part of the kind of therapeutical music scene in hospitals and things like that. And had you ever used Irish music in your work before, or was that something that kind of came in later in life?
Oh no, I always use it because when I started doing that, I was involved in hospice after I graduated from nursing school, which I did in my 40s. So I was involved in hospice, and that's when David made the harp. And so as soon as I knew a few tunes, which were Irish tunes, I would start playing for my patients, and they would fall asleep. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? And so I decided to study, to learn what I was doing, and that's how I began studying therapeutic music. But yeah, I play a lot of Irish tunes because mostly we use our own repertoire in our work, and we change the music depending on what the patient needs. Like if they need to be relaxed more, we might slow things down or whatever. But the airs are perfect for this kind of work.
But that's so beautiful. I'd never heard much about that kind of the mixing of music and medicine and things, and it's really lovely to think that music can travel across oceans and be so beneficial to people in that way. Yeah, that's brilliant. So now I'd like to hear more about your kind of journey with Irish and I suppose with Bitesize as well. So how did you come across Bitesize originally, and how did your journey kind of begin with us?
Well, I was, so wasn't anywhere local to study Irish back then, like 4 years ago, even that I knew of. And so I was searching around the web, and that's how I found it. And when I saw it was Munster Irish, I was like, okay. So so I was totally a beginner, totally knew nothing, and I just found the way the lessons were set up, and the way the way it was set up really helped me. I think I've been doing Duolingo a little bit, but the thing about Duolingo is they don't explain, at least the way back then, what the grammar is, and it seemed very sort of contrary to me.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of very much a surface lesson, this is that, but you don't really understand why.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get you. And yeah, you're very active on Pobal as well. You're always sharing great resources, different things, and you shared something there for Culture Night, which was on last weekend that I had never even heard of. So it's great to have that kind of community. Do you think that's kind of important to you, especially if you're learning at home, to have a kind of online community to bounce ideas off and share things with?
Oh yeah, no, I think, and I really, I hadn't been on Pobal until fairly recently, and I really enjoy it, and I love connecting with other people and sharing stuff. And I mean, the language is about speaking, which is my biggest challenge, actually. So anything I can do to connect with people.
And what do you think is the most difficult aspect of the Irish language? You mentioned there speaking. Do you think the pronunciation maybe is the most difficult part, or?
Well, what I've realized, and it's been very interesting as an elder who's mostly a monoglot, I mean, I took Latin for years, and when I was in school, and a little Spanish, but really I never spoke another language. it's really the listening and getting, it seems to me that the pronunciation, for me, if I can't pronounce a word, I can't remember it, number one. And I can't be confident in speaking at all if I can't pronounce it.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, the pronunciation is really, really important. And what happened to me is after I started doing bite size, like a year or two later, I heard about Irish lessons up in Albany, which is about an hour from me. And
Mm-hmm.
I started going to it, but it's Ulster Irish, and they're really gung ho about it. And I found that to be very confusing. And I mean, I'm much better at holding my own now, but um, the pronunciation differences, it's quite different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting as well because a lot of people come to the language for ancestral reasons. So like yourself, you
Mhm.
had that kind of connection to Munster Irish, so you would like to learn Munster Irish. And I've never, I studied languages in college myself, and I never have experienced such a kind of tribal approach to language in the way there is with Irish, that you really stick to your dialect and you do not want to waver from it. And I'm the same, you know, if I'm teaching, I'm like, this is Munster Irish, this is how we say it.
Mhm.
So it's something that I think because I think the language is definitely, it's evolving and there's more and more people learning. I think it'll be interesting to see where that goes, you know, if people are willing to kind of become a little bit more flexible with their dialect, teachers and students both. But it's just a funny one. I think, you know, people get this real sense of identity with the dialect. So I'm glad you're on the Munster side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I've gotten to the point where, and actually, I don't want to, my teacher, I am taking lessons up there. We're doing it online too. And she's wonderful. She's really good. But she'll say, because there's a couple of us, she'll say, oh, well, you'd say it this way in Munster. But it's the speaking and the rhythm actually that she has that, yeah,
Mhm.
it's interesting.
It's different, yeah. And even the music as well, you know, the music kind of
Hmm.
reflected more dialectical things as well, and there was regional kind of sounds and styles and things. So I think that's more, it's becoming a little bit more uniform now, but yeah, it could happen with the language too. So what would you say to someone who is starting to learn Irish? You know, they're brand new to the language, they don't really know where to begin. What would be your number one tip to them?
I think listening to, like, having radio not Gaeltacht in the background, listening to music, just listening and to get the feeling for it. And I think that's one thing, just to kind of have it in the background a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then one of the things that I'm finding is the most valuable to me is like repetition. Um, Trying to get the language in your body so that it's like automatic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, one of my teachers has said to me, that you have to, yeah. And I think one of the things that, I don't know if it's good or bad, I think sometimes it's bad, is there's actually so much available out there on the web. It can be almost too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be a bit daunting if you Google something, even for
Yeah.
myself, if I'm posting something for Pobal and I Google something, there's just endless material, and that is so recent as well. You know, that wasn't available
Hmm.
5-10 years ago. There wasn't that much available. So yeah, I think you're right. Once the language becomes kind of automatic, you don't even realize yourself saying something in Irish, then you know you've gotten it. But definitely the rhythm and pronunciation is something to tackle. So yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the very good things about Bite Size as well, with the bio, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of sound resources available for people. So yeah, that's great, and thank you for sharing your advice with us. Um, so you spent some time also in the Waterford Gaeltacht last year in on Rhine, and you're planning to go back this year, weren't you? But unfortunately, with everything that's happening, it can't go ahead. But would you like to go back to the Gaeltacht at some stage?
Oh yeah, I would love to. Yeah, I couldn't go. I wasn't planning to go this year because I actually had a knee replacement. So,
Okay.
but yeah, next year I would love to.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. I mean, it's wonderful.
Yeah. We could have a little bite-sized reunion on Ryan. That would be lovely.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah. Well, Gurv Mil Mahagat, Melinda, you've really been a pleasure to chat to, and I loved hearing your story and everything. And I think it's kind of an inspiration really that you started with a Native American, that you kind of got that connection from, your own native, your local native language and local native people, and then you said, okay, where's my native people? So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you so much for sharing it, and keep sharing your lovely resources with us on Pobal as well. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. So any parting words for our community or our members?
Well, I mean, thank you all so much for what you're doing and your dedication to helping us all learn the language. I love, one of the reasons I stayed with Bite Size, it's just the way the company is run inspires me.
Hmm.
So it's like I just really want to support it, and I just love the generosity that
Oh, that's
you
great.
guys. So
Yeah.
thank you very much.
It's lovely. It's a very close community on Pobal. It's really, really nice. Even the short time I've been there, it's been really nice to get to know everyone and understand your different needs and levels and things. So yeah, I look forward to getting to know you more anyway. So yeah, Gurv Mil Mil Mahagat Arish Melinda.
Yeah. Oh,
And Ben Midig Lauer Glua will chat soon.
yeah. Thank you. Guru Magat. Yeah.
Lon.
Salon.